Good morning, everybody. I'm Annette Wimberger and joined by Joe Palacios, my co-host, and you're listening to the Veteran Lifestyle Magazine podcast, where we share real, unfiltered stories from inside and outside the military community. From mental health and life after service to advocacy and transition, we bring you conversations and resources that empower, connect, and remind you that your story matters. I'm really excited today and actually a little bit nervous. I don't know what is happening, but our guest this morning is someone that I met in New York at a military veterans and journalism conference. And I've just been watching her and I admire her, and she's kind of like my role model. So I'm going to bring you, good morning.
Hi, guys. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
No, it's such an honor. I appreciate you. So we are honored, like I said, to sit down with Claire Stapleton, an award-winning journalist, military spouse, and now leading a voice in psychedelic therapy advocacy.
Yeah, I was a CNN senior international producer and editor, was my most recent role, and I left CNN at the end of 2024. So it's been about 6 months now.
There we go. Okay, well, thank you very much again. And we are just going to get right into it because there's a lot to talk about, a lot that you and I had discussed in the background, and I want to make sure that we get this story out there. So we will dive into the first question. You have reported from war zones, mass casualty events, and humanitarian disasters for over 16 years. How did those experiences shape your understanding of trauma, and how have they influenced the way you approach healing today?
Yeah, so as mentioned, I spent 16 years at CNN covering domestic breaking news for the first decade and then shifting to international conflict for the last 6 years. I think as journalists, we witness the worst moments in people's lives. So we often don't realize how much we're internalizing along the way. I know I absolutely did not. I wasn't the one that was holding a weapon or losing my home or losing a child, which was oftentimes what I was speaking to, people out in the field or in the newsroom when I was talking to them about whatever mass casualty event was at that moment. But I think over time, that constant exposure to trauma, it builds up and it slowly changes how you perceive the world. What I've learned is that trauma, it's not always loud, it's not always immediate. Sometimes it's very subtle, it creeps in slowly. And if you don't acknowledge it, it really starts to just harden you. That's what happened to me. I lost my ability over time to connect, to feel joy, to be present where I was. I looked like I had it all together from the outside, but inside I felt very empty.
How hard was it for you to continue to put on that persona when you had this role to fill? Because I know for some of us, we show up on social media every day, like we have it all together, but behind the scenes, a few of my peers will talk and we're like, this sucks. This is hard. How do you continue to do that?
I mean, I think like anything else, you just do it, right? Mm-hmm. You don't think about it day to day. You don't think about it in the moment. And so, for the last 6 years between my husband's military deployments and then my career as a journalist, we were basically trading off being in conflict zones. So I did 4 Ukraine deployments back to back between my husband's last 2 military deployments. When he got back from his most recent deployment last year, I was already mentally preparing myself to deploy again, because honestly, that's really where I felt most alive. I was chasing that adrenaline rush, that sense of urgency, wanting to feel alive, purposeful. But at home, things were not okay. My kids were struggling. I was numb. Somewhere deep down, I knew I wasn't showing up as the version of myself my kids needed. I was showing up professionally. I mean, I was in a really fantastic place professionally. I felt like I was doing purposeful work in that arena, but it was outside of my professional life that things were just really kind of falling apart. It was around that time last year that I first heard the word Ibogaine, and it was like something that sparked in me that I didn't even know had gone dark. It was the first time that I really considered that maybe I wasn't thriving in what it looked like to the outside world, that maybe I needed to stop pushing, stop living in fight or flight, and finally take a moment to find a way back to myself and really find my heart, because after so many years of covering trauma and conflict, I really struggled to feel alive without having that adrenaline rush of being in the field or being in breaking news or whatever it was, at that moment that had to deal with my career.
AC, I love that you mentioned something just previously before your first experience with Ibogaine about how trauma creeps up on you, like that PTSD stuff, and then you start to get that. And I think a lot of veterans that have multiple deployments feel that, or even, which is insane, it's like you start to get those urges. You feel these like something's not right. And what's crazy is what's not right is that we are in calm and peace, right? Mm-hmm. And we've been like kind of indoctrinated in that rush of intense danger and conflict for like short periods of time and then boredom. But then I think it creates this weird thing. So I love that.
Yeah, it's like I could, and I, throughout this work that I've been doing the last 6 to 9 months, I've never felt, and I've been married to my husband for a long time. He's been in special operations for 17 years, but I never ever looked at the correlations of being a conflict journalist to being a veteran. I just never saw those. But the ability to react in chaos is one thing, and I think a lot of us do that really, really well. But it's the day-to-day mundane, getting the kids to school, getting dinner, getting just right. Things like that I think that it was difficult for me personally, because I worked really well in chaos. I did not work well in the day-to-day, suburban mom life. It was difficult for me, and I think a lot of veterans feel the same way.
No, for sure. And you know what's great? What's great about that point, and I want to highlight that point that you made. Veterans are actually trained. Yeah. We kind of like during our training, we try to get inoculated to the kind of traumas that we're going to go through, right? So, and my point was that trauma is subjective to people. So, like, I love the idea that we have to recognize that we don't need to figure out what caused your trauma. Let's just work on fixing it, because trauma is subjective, right? Some people just have already experienced just a little bit of it and they've inoculated to the trauma, and then they'll able to take more, but it builds up. But some people have never had traumas, and then they hit small traumas and it affects them just as bad. So what's really great is I was reading about the therapy, as you're going to talk about Ibogaine, is that the level of trauma is irrelevant in how it helps. So I'll land my plane there because I know we have a series of other questions.
So I think you've already talked a little bit about the Ibogaine, but this one question, I wanted to bring this up really quick. As a special operations military spouse and the daughter of a parent recovering from substance abuse, you bring deeply personal insight into your advocacy for Ibogaine. So how do those dual identities influence your decision to leave CNN and pursue this mission full time?
Yeah, so being a special operations spouse and the daughter of a mom who's been in long-term recovery, I mean, she struggled with alcoholism and was able to achieve sobriety when I was in high school, but it was a real struggle for her for many years, and it's still a struggle, to be able to continue her sobriety. But it gave me a front row seat to the two of the deepest struggles that people face, which is trauma and substance use. And I've lived inside both of those worlds in addition to my life as a conflict journalist. So when I first heard about Ibogaine, which was about this time last year, it really caught my attention because once I started digging into the science, especially the Stanford study, which came out 2 Januaries ago, I highly encourage everyone to take a look at that. But then I started doing what I would do as a journalist, speaking to experts, people who had been treated, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I would spend my work days at CNN covering the Middle East, Ukraine, elsewhere, and then on my days off, I would interview people about Ibogaine. I couldn't believe that something this powerful even existed, and that I had never heard about it before. So I was first introduced. We had a friend that was suffering from a traumatic brain injury, and he heard a Joe Rogan podcast where somebody was talking about Ibogaine. And he called and said, "Hey, I'm at the end of my rope. I have just booked my trip to Mexico to go down and get Ibogaine treatment. If this doesn't work, I probably will not be living any longer because I have no hope left." And that was the first time that I had ever heard the word Ibogaine. I had heard about ayahuasca and psilocybin and some of these other things, these other, psychedelic treatment modalities, but never heard the word Ibogaine. And so it sparked in me a curiosity that I just took an approach like a journalist and started digging and researching and interviewing people. And the more that I did that, the more I became convinced that this was something that the world really needed to know about. Military life, it's really, really difficult, as you guys know, but it's particularly difficult on our children. And then when you add in my career, constantly chasing global crisis, the truth is that like my children had not had stability in a very long time. So I got to a point where I realized that they needed me as a mom who wasn't constantly living in survival mode, and they deserved someone that was grounded and present, emotionally stable. And I really needed that too. So I'll never say that, the work that I'm doing now is more important than I did reporting on global events. But I do believe that working on psychedelic advocacy, particularly with Ibogaine at this current point in time, I'm able to move the needle much further in this space than I was probably able to do that in, reporting on war and conflict. Telling the truth about Ibogaine, helping people understand what it is, and then fighting for the research and access that's desperately needed in the United States, it just really felt like a responsibility that I couldn't ignore. And so when the opportunity came up at the end of last year to decide whether I was going to accept a new role within CNN or take a step back and go focus on this full time, it was a calling that I did not anticipate. I was at CNN since I was 22 years old. It is all I knew. It was, my security blanket, and I loved the people that I worked with. I had a really incredible team, but it just felt like all the signs were pointing that the time was now to be able to make a big jump and try and use what skills that I have as a storyteller to help elevate the conversation around what this medicine can do for people. Because I think that hope is a really powerful tool. And when we give people hope, potentially they'll hang on a little bit longer than maybe they would if they didn't have it.
Absolutely. I was curious. I was looking into a little bit about the game, but again, I had never. The first I heard of it was when she mentioned yours. But your push is not necessarily strictly Ibogaine. Are you doing you're on board with the full psychedelic push for treatments, or is it strictly Ibogaine? And is there a big difference? Because I know a lot of people would like to know the difference in how yours is, how this will help them in different ways than the other psychedelics that are out there.
Yeah, so it's kind of a layered question. I was originally, when I left CNN, I was focused on Ibogaine awareness and education, because with my experience being involved in the substance abuse community through my upbringing, I really truly think that Ibogaine has the potential to make a lot of waves in the opioid crisis. Ibogaine has shown incredible promise, and I don't have a medical background. I want to say that from the start, that everything that I have learned medically from Ibogaine has been through interviews with medical professionals. But Ibogaine can interrupt substance abuse. It can interrupt addiction. And currently, specifically with the opioid crisis, there's not a whole lot of great treatment options. It's abstinence or doing like Suboxone or methadone treatments. And a lot of times those are actually opioids in and of itself. And so you're subbing one opioid for another. It's not true healing. And so when I learned that Ibogaine can interrupt opioid use disorder, that to me was incredibly shocking. And then in addition to that, if you look at the Stanford study, for example, they took 30 special forces veterans, and after doing Ibogaine treatment, and these were all guys that had severe PTSD, TBI, substance abuse, 88% of them no longer qualified as having PTSD after doing Ibogaine. We don't have anything within the PTSD treatment modalities that shows those kind of results, shows an 88%. And that, again, that's one study. That's why we need more research. So I originally jumped into this sphere not knowing really anything about psychedelics or psychedelic therapies. I just had no knowledge of that. It wasn't part of my world at all. As I've learned more, I do think that there is a place for different treatment modalities, different psychedelics for different people. I am really focused on Ibogaine right now because I think outside of, the veteran community, we're kind of like an insular group, right? But less than 1% of the country is military connected. And so while it's incredibly important for us and our families to heal veterans and to make sure that our families are in a good place, for the vast majority of the country, they don't even know somebody serving. And so I think that a way that you can make this a national and a global conversation outside of healing our veterans is to be able to attack the addiction component. And I think Ibogaine has a lot of promise in the recent studies that have come out over the last, well, not even recent, I mean, the people have been doing studies on Ibogaine for decades, just not in the United States. So I am focused on Ibogaine, but I'm also open to other treatment modalities. But I think as far as using my skills as a storyteller to try and educate people and change any preconceived notions on how this can be a really a potential game changer in the treatment of addiction and substance abuse. And even there's been anecdotal evidence that it's helped with neurological disorders like Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis or Alzheimer's. We need a whole lot more research done. And so that is where my advocacy comes in, is educating lawmakers and the general public about what we know with the science by telling personal stories of healing. And a lot of those personal stories are veteran focused. But I do think that it spans so much further outside of the veteran community. And I think for our country, that's how you really get the rest of the community, the rest of our population to care, is make it known that it's not just a veteran issue that we're talking about. I mean, I saw a statistic as high as 1 in 4 people struggle with substance abuse. That is a massive, massive number. And so it's being able to tie all these different threads together and put it into a storytelling form where you are educating people, but you're also tugging at their heartstrings and you're giving them hope for, their brother, sister, husband, whoever it is in their life that might be able to benefit from these types of treatment modalities. That was a long-winded way of saying I'm open to anything that helps heal.
Oh, I was going to say, this is mind blowing to me. When you shared some of this on LinkedIn, I immediately commented because I wanted to see how to get this story out here, which is why we had continued this conversation, because it is so hard for anyone really to try to get seen and heard. So how are you able to make that happen? What would you tell someone who just believes in something so much, has this passion and this heart and this drive to just have somebody listen to their story and say, this is what we need, this is what helps, this is, what would you tell someone who's on this mission? Because I don't know how long it's taken for you to get this out there, and it's, yeah,
I mean, it has been, the last 6 months have been wild. It has, I kind of jumped on the bandwagon of what has happened in Texas. And I joined a group called the Texas Ibogaine Initiative right after I left CNN because former Texas Governor Rick Perry, he learned about Ibogaine. He's very close with Morgan and Marcus Luttrell, Congressman Luttrell, and both of them had gone through Ibogaine treatment to be able to heal from a lot of wounds that they suffered in service of their country. And so Rick Perry was, adamant that this is something that we need to bring to the United States. We need more research. We need more clinical data. We're going to make this happen in Texas. And so Texas just passed the largest publicly funded psychedelic bill in history. And I'll say not just US history, but global. I mean, there has never been anything larger than this passed to put public funding towards a pathway of FDA clinical trials so that we can potentially get Ibogaine available to the people that need it in the United States. Because currently, when somebody is getting treatment, they have to leave the United States. So at this stage, it's been thousands of US veterans have left the country. Most of the time, they're going to Mexico to get treated with Ibogaine in order to find healing, for wounds that they sustained in service of their country. And to me, that just doesn't make any sense. That makes no logical sense. So I'll use an example in what we did in Texas to educate lawmakers, because one of the good things about Ibogaine is that most people have never heard about it before. So you're not trying to overcome preconceived notions and biases that people might have about it, like we would sometimes using psilocybin, which is mushrooms and things like that. There's always this kind of preconceived notion, but most people have never heard about Ibogaine. So with the Texas Ibogaine Initiative, we used veterans that were sharing how they underwent Ibogaine treatment to help them heal from trauma. And then we, found parents that were talking about losing their children to opioid use. And once lawmakers were able to hear those stories, those raw, honest human stories, it became nearly impossible for them to ignore the urgency of what this country is facing and the potential of what this medicine could offer. So it's one thing, I think, to look at the scientific studies and read the data on substance abuse or mental health, but it's a completely other thing to hear from a Navy SEAL say, it saved my life. And so we didn't go out pushing the science and the data in front of the lawmakers first. What I was involved in is putting these stories of healing first that were then backed by science. Because I think when you can change hearts and minds, then you can change policy. And, that is where I believe that storytelling is essential. When people can see themselves or somebody that they love in these narratives, it really creates space for understanding and eventually for change. And what happened in Texas specifically is that, we might find one lawmaker who, when we come to him and he's like real conservative and he says, I don't do drugs. I don't want to talk about drugs. And we said, well, let's just have a conversation. And we'd put him in front of a veteran that, we had Green Berets, we had Navy SEALs, from every different branch. And they said, this is my story. At the end of the conversation, we did not have anybody to date say, I'm not interested in learning more. And that's why I think that the power of our voices to make change is so critical. Because if I were to say, here's a research study, can you support this? Probably not going to get 100% onboarding on that. But if I say, here is 3 people, listen to their stories and listen to how they healed with this, and then bring the science behind, it has been extraordinarily successful. In Texas specifically, where, we just passed the largest publicly funded research initiative in history. That's wild. And that was only with 4 or 5 months of work. And so I think that by slowly chipping away, not Texas is the first, but we're trying to make this a national movement. I'll say in March, there was a meeting held in Aspen where delegations from 15 different states across the country came together to try and figure out a way to make this a national movement, to be able to create FDA-approved clinical trials, collate funding, things like that. So lawmakers, they're waking up. It is a process that takes having these one-on-one conversations to be able to make them understand what the potential for this is. But I do think that there is an incredible amount of momentum, and it might just be because now I'm in this space where I wasn't in this space before, but it feels like now is the time that this is going to happen. I bet if we were to have the same conversation a year from now, it would be in a very different place.
That sounds super cool. I was just a curious question on the treatment. And like, you say that right now they have to go to Mexico. Like, what does the treatment of Ibogaine entail? And like, what are the costs to veterans? And then going like to creating this whole concept, like where would that end up going? Like,
yeah, so it's not
the treatments.
So Ibogaine is currently a Schedule I drug in the United States, which means that it's the barriers to research are very, very high. You cannot get treated for Ibogaine here. There are places around the world where you can go get Ibogaine treatment. One of those places is Mexico. There's multiple Ibogaine clinics, but what I would say is that anybody looking to go get treated with Ibogaine, there are some serious health risks involved if you don't get the proper screening. So like there's a heart risk involved with Ibogaine treatment. And so any clinic that you seek out to go to, they should be doing pre-screening. They should be doing an EKG. They should be asking you about all the medications that you take. I mean, it is not without risks. Now the risk can be mitigated very, very to the point where the risk is quite low if you go through the clinical procedures. So I'll just tell you about one of the clinics that I went to down in Mexico. You take once you get through all the pre-scanning, the morning of your Ibogaine treatment, the medication is given to you in capsules, and it's dosed by your weight and a couple other different things. So each person might have a different number of capsules, but you take the capsules and then you put on an eye mask, headphones. There's typically like a playlist or native Bwiti music. The Bwitis is where the indigenous peoples in Central Africa, where Ibogaine originated from. Because I don't think I mentioned this, but Ibogaine is actually the root of a shrub in Central Africa, primarily in Gabon. But it's a natural plant medicine. It literally is a root from this kind of small tree. And so anyways, the morning of your Ibogaine treatment, at least in this particular clinic, you are hooked up to an IV, you have, heart monitors on, there's a nurse in the room with you at all times. It is kind of what you would expect from a US medical facility. So you put your eye mask on, you have your headphones on, you lay back, and everyone's a little different, but typically between 30 minutes and an hour, you start, hearing kind of like a high buzz in the ears. A lot of people get visions, some might get auditory hallucinations, different types of things, but everyone's journey is very different. But then you go on what is typically between a 6 to 12 hour introspective journey. And you're laying in the bed the entire time. Some people feel they need to purge, they might throw up or have to go to the restroom. That's not everybody. But it is a very introspective experience. But if you were watching somebody get an Ibogaine treatment, you're pretty much just looking at somebody laying in a hospital bed. It's not very exciting to watch somebody else go through it. But for the person that's going through the treatment, it can be a very difficult experience. That's another thing I want to point out is that there is next to zero risk of recreational use with Ibogaine. That's why you don't hear like underground Ibogaine parties. Like it's not a fun experience for most people. And, they don't exactly know how or why it works. That's why we need more research. But the theory is that it is rewiring your brain. It's finding the root of the trauma, because trauma all comes, it can manifest itself in different ways, PTSD or substance abuse or what have you. But like it comes from root trauma. And so, Ibogaine has been shown in studies to create neuroplasticity in your brain, being able to create. Actually, one of the best analogies that I heard, it was a Green Beret named Chris Thompson. He testified in the Texas House hearing, and a lawmaker asked him and said, hey, you explained to me what Ibogaine did for you. Could you say it again? Something about snow. And he said, well, if you're a skier and you go down your brain, think of it like, snow slopes, and everyone goes down the same slopes. And so it's just the path of least resistance. You're going to just keep going down the ones that you've been going down. And he said, and what Ibogaine did is it gave my brain a fresh powder of snow. So I no longer had to go down that path of least resistance in my brain, whether that was grabbing a drink or grabbing, pills or whatever it is to be able to cope. He said, it gave me the reset that I needed to be able to choose my own path. It wasn't a magic bullet, but it just allowed me to be able to create new pathways. And I thought that was a really incredible analogy to explain how, because it's not a magic bullet. You still have to do work, but it's a hard reset on your brain.
I've had many not personal experiences with psychedelics, but I've really been in that space, and you're describing similarly. Like, how much of like your own research has maybe kind of delved into the actual ceremonial parts of these things? Like, have you looked into like taking the trip and going to one of these, like either an Ibogaine ceremony, or even going down and doing like an ayahuasca or any of those other psychedelics? Have you tried or looked at kind of just to report on it and figure out like, how do I use that value that I learned from those traditional ways that they do that and apply it to this pathway? And if not, what is your kind of like, how are you going to go on that? Would you consider that?
Yeah, I think, for me, I was really, when I left CNN, I was really goal driven in the sense that I was like, okay, I'm going to go help out in Texas, and their legislative session ends on June 2nd. And so we're going to get this done before that. So I was really focused on how to educate lawmakers, and especially in Texas, where it's an extremely conservative political arena. And so that was my goal. We have achieved that goal. We have surpassed that goal. That goal we can check off. But throughout the last couple months, I've been having a lot more conversations about, being able to get in touch with the indigenous communities in Gabon, where, Ibogaine originally was discovered and where it's grown. And I think that having the ancestral spiritual element is so important. I'm open to the other modalities that you mentioned, ayahuasca, psilocybin. I actually just recently came back from a military spouse retreat with the Hope Project doing psilocybin down in Puerto Vallarta in Mexico, and I went in there without any I didn't know what to expect, to be honest, but it was my first experience doing the spiritual side of where we're working with the people that forage the mushrooms from the indigenous lands and things like that. And that was something that was very eye-opening for me. And very healing as well, especially being with a bunch of other military spouses who I didn't previously know before going on this experience. I would highly recommend the Hope Project, run by Allison Wilson. It's a branch of Heroic Hearts Project, because they put so much into the pre and post integration, the coaching sessions and things like that. And I think that was very different from what my Ibogaine experience was, which was also very profound. So I do think that there are different, I think I don't think one is better than the other. I think that they're all important, and I think that there's space for everyone. A saying that I say a lot of time with my team that I work with in Texas is that we want everyone to have a seat at the table, but first we have to build the table. And so, it's incredibly important to have all voices involved in this endeavor.
Well, that's why we had you here. No, I mean, that's why we brought you here. I think that is one of the biggest things that we've been trying to do. I think I shared this with Annette one time before. I don't know, something happened. It's like, are you going to go to the table? Are you going to sit at their table? And I'm like, man, we built the table. We don't need to sit at anybody else's. And that's what this is about. In the very end, it's like awareness is something, but we need to take action. And what I was going to say is I am absolutely amazed that you guys were able to get just funding for research on a psychedelic in the same session that Texas did cut out all cannabis stuff, literally no CBD, so I think once you get this process done, we would love you to come back and really get them on the cannabis side as well. Because it's like you said, there's a modality for everybody. And if we think that just one way to do, there's not one way, just bring up that old, there's no one way to skin a cat. We don't skin cats here, by the way. Rescue them, just want to let you know that. But it's the thing, right? So that being said, what kind of awareness and what kind of action can we as a community and we as a group help you amplify this? Because that's our mission here, is just to amplify people doing good things.
I mean, I think conversations like this, one of the things that now that we've got kind of Texas not finished. I mean, we are just starting, right? Because we still have to do the infrastructure to make the clinical trials happen. But getting funding was the first huge giant hurdle. And now that we've done that, one of the things that I want to do is, do really targeted storytelling to different states that I know will potentially be open to doing what Texas is doing. So, for example, in Texas, we found Texas veterans, because Texas is a very big supporter of their own veterans, and found stories of healing that were Texas specific. I would like to do that across the nation for other states and lawmakers that feel like their state might potentially be able to join the program. And so, in order to do that, it takes time, it takes funding, it takes finding the correct characters, and people that have really were the trendsetters. I have only been in this space for 6 months, and I've only known about this space for a year. And so my hat goes off and I bow down to people that have been doing this for years and years and years, because I think that for many years it was like an echo chamber of, hey, we're putting this information out. Is anybody hearing us? Is it making any difference? And I think that, I'm almost like riding the coattails of how much has been done before I even joined on. But I think that there is still so much more that needs to be done. I mentioned it before, but one of the great things about Ibogaine is that most people have never heard about it before. So we're not trying to change preconceived notions. We're educating them from the very beginning, which it's so much easier to do than versus trying to change opinion of something that people think that they know. But yeah, so for me, it's just, being a mouthpiece and trying to connect with more people that have found, healing through these substances, so then I can then tell those stories and share their stories with whoever it might be, lawmakers or the general public. But, doing things like this is I'm so grateful to have the platform that you guys have given me, because I think that every conversation we have, we might only reach, a couple dozen people, but those couple dozen people know another couple dozen who know another couple dozen, and it just spreads like wildfire. I think when you give people hope where there wasn't any before, they can't help but talk about it. And that is literally how I got here.
You came to the right place, because, and everybody will attest to this, it doesn't seem like it, but I know a guy. So I would really love to connect you to some really cool veterans that have been in this psychedelic space and healing, that you can get other stories from and that you could learn from, and kind of maybe build a bigger table. Really great guys, really wanting to push this kind of therapies. And I actually love that we can get people that are considered mainstream, I guess, to advocate, because I think that's the biggest thing. You said that earlier. It's like you got to get the right people to meet the other right people. Like, for instance, me, Joe, just trying to go up to the Texas legislator, and there's like a lot of guys like that. There's a lot of small people that have band together, and they try to go up there and they try to make change. But let's be real, you got to know somebody or know somebody. So I'm glad that we're starting to get people that know somebody to advocate for these kinds of things. Because you also mentioned something earlier too that really stood out about the veteran community, and people don't realize this, is it's so small. There is this misconception that everybody knows veterans, but it is absolutely not true. It's such a small, minute members of the population that even interact with veterans in a personal level. So the fact that you're advocating for us, I'm just so grateful. And again, I'd love to connect you with some of these great guys that are in this space, and maybe we can help build that story for you.
Absolutely. I would love that. And, anyone else that's hearing this, feel free to reach out to me. My LinkedIn inbox is a little bit full right now, but I promise you I'm trying to go through it and not miss any of those. I would say that there is a nonprofit organization that we're actively forming called Americans for Ibogaine. That's with Governor Rick Perry, myself, the Luttrells, and others that have been involved in Texas. And it's very new, but the entire purpose is going to be around educating people around these modalities, and then just trying really to build the foundation to create policy change in the United States.
Thank you so much, AnnClaire. Yeah, this has been such an impactful show today. I know there's going to be a lot. I think, Joe, you had mentioned you were already talking about it with some of your veteran crew, and just the people that I've been talking to. Everyone's like, wait, what? It's just we've never heard of it. What is going on? What's happening? Especially Texas, because Joe and I are in Texas. He's up in the Houston area, and I'm down here in Central by Austin. And so it's from here to there, there's so much that needs to be done still. So I do appreciate everything, and I can't wait to share this across more platforms and get more people on the team and help out. So again, I know you're very busy, so I do appreciate you being on here today.
Absolutely. And I will say that one of the things that was really helpful in Texas of educating lawmakers is there's a documentary that's coming out called In Waves of War. And I just saw a post on their Instagram that they're going to be streaming on Netflix at the beginning of November. So we've still got a little ways to wait. But it centers around the story of 4 Navy SEALs that came back from war, really struggling. It goes through, kind of the traditional story that we know of nothing is working, we're trying everything. And they went down to Mexico and got healed. The Stanford study that I mentioned, it's part of this documentary. So I just think it's a really incredible piece of storytelling. And, it's one of those things that I've seen it a couple times because we streamed it for Texas lawmakers. And I'm always like, God, if this was just available, I could just send this to people. And it's a really good start, to say, hey, watch this and then let's have the conversation. Because I think with Ibogaine specifically, it's such a steep learning curve that being able to, just have that, here's a movie about it, watch it, and then let's talk. I've also done some videos, produced some 5-6 minute pieces of personal testimony, healing, and things like that, that I would love if you share. But I think being able to have those personal testimony stories to have people watch before you have the conversation, it usually, what I find is it helps make the conversation go a little bit smoother. Just coming to it of like, what is this, tell me about it, let's start there.
No, we would love that. Yeah, anything you could send, we will definitely share it out on all our platforms. Like you said, sometimes they need to watch it before they can talk about it, so that they can actually hear it and feel it.
Yeah, and if they're more data driven, then go look at the Stanford study on Ibogaine. I mean, it's pretty remarkable. I'm again don't have a medical background, but I'll explain this in like the simplest terms that I know how. Traditional science has taught us that when you have a brain injury, once your brain is dead, it's dead. It doesn't come back online. But what the Stanford study has shown is that pre and post Ibogaine, parts of the brains of these special forces veterans that were previously dormant from injury were lighting back up in the brain scans post Ibogaine. And that is something that it just doesn't exist in the medical literature as we know of. So this is the first, to my knowledge, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the first medical breakthrough that I'm aware of that puts traumatic brain injury brains back online in a sense. So that even just that one little part, to me, is just absolutely remarkable.
I've never heard of anything from TBI. Have you, Joe? I mean, that's.
No, not like that. About it. Well, I mean, I've heard of stuff that lights your brains back up.
Okay.
But not rebuild. Like, I think that's something that really needs to be kind of looked into. But what's crazy is this is what you said, and there's no medical history of this. But then again, how often are we setting aside the idea of natural occurring medicine, plant medicine?
Yeah.
How often are they just kind of like, that's hokey, right?
Right. Well, and what I've learned is that these clinical studies cost hundreds of millions of dollars. So is there other substances that could do that out there? Yeah, of course.
Sure. I also think
this is the one that we have one study now, like
100%. What gets me sometimes is that some of these modalities of healing have been around for centuries.
Oh yeah.
And they've been kind of perfected by different shamans. But we need to now develop millions and millions of dollars in funding to test it. It's like, I mean, part of it I understand because there are even like if you go to some of the shaman type of kind of ceremonies and all those things, they've actually come to the point where they do some of those similar things. There's pre-care, there's like, you're going to do this, you need to drink water for 2 weeks, do other type of stuff, you got to stop. Like, so I love the idea that this is, again, like I said earlier, this is becoming mainstream. Like the misinformation or just the not knowing what you don't know, I think hurts us in lots of ways. So it's good that this is being really grateful for you. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you guys so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
No, this has been amazing. So we have to close this up, guys. Very sad time, but keep following us because we at Veteran Lifestyle Magazine, we share the real stories and challenges of life during and after military service because your journey matters. So whether you're transitioning, healing, or rebuilding, we're here to provide inspiration, resources, and community every step of the way. But here are 3 things that you can still do to stay in the know. And that's follow us on veteranlifestylemagazine.com. We're also on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Instagram, everywhere that you are, that we are going to be there as well to share stories. So keep following us, and we will be sharing all of her social media links, ways to contact her, her bio, everything about her will be in our show notes so that you can keep in contact and stay abreast of what is happening here in Texas and with the Ibogaine. So thank you very much. Until next time on our show here at Veteran Lifestyle Magazine.
So when I met Ryan Hunt and Annette Wittenberger, they kept talking about this amazing idea that they had and had previously been successful at, but it had been paused and they wanted to keep going with it. And they were talking about how veterans can learn resources about entrepreneurship, education, really connecting with our fellow veteran community and being successful. So obviously I wanted to be a part of that. And I am really excited to be a part of 2025 because we are going to have even more amazing speakers and resources.